Hello, it's currently 1:30 in the morning right now, so I have to be a little bit quiet, but it's time to finally see what people are talking about with this book. And if you've been on the internet in the past couple of years, you've been on Book Talk or like YouTube side of book things and all that, I'm sure you've seen this book come up. It's just kind of talked about as the sad one. Honestly, I haven't heard anything mentioned about the actual plot. Like, I haven't heard any details about what the story actually is. The only things I've heard from people is just, oh yeah, that one will 100% make you cry. That's all I've seen people say. From every single video that I've watched of people reading it, they've all cried in the last like 100 pages, like sobbing, crying. And the other thing I've heard, before I start this video at all, I do just want to say the other thing that I've heard is that there's a lot of like trigger warnings for a lot of stuff and that you should actually take them seriously. I know I'm a little late getting to it because it got popular like a couple years ago, I think. I feel like it was popular in like 2019 up until now, and it's just been popular on like TikTok and YouTube and everything. But the one thing that I've seen is like, don't read it just because it's a trend to read it or that you feel left out because you're not reading this sad book, because apparently it's really hard material to read and like emotionally it's really tolling, and if that's not something that you can handle, like, it's not worth it. Which, you know, to be fair, that probably means I shouldn't be reading it right now because I just finished reading this book for the 7th time and it still made me cry. If you know the ending of this book, then I literally just finished it, like just set it down, but onto this. Sorry, my thoughts are kind of scrambled right now. Like I said, it's 1:30 in the morning and I just finished reading that book, so I'm all over the place. I just wanted to kind of emphasize that point of like, just because it was a trend to read this, or like, oh, it's such a sad book, it'll make you cry, all this stuff, like, don't read it if you can't handle it. I don't want this video to be adding to that, but I do want to also record to see if I have a similar experience to what I've seen other people have, just because I know I don't really get super emotional over books, although I did just cry over the last book I read. Like, in the past month or two, I've been getting more emotional about books, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. So currently it is Monday the 7th, I think? I want to say it's the 7th. 1:30 in the morning. I don't know how much I'm going to be able to read tonight just because I do need to sleep at some point, but I figured I might as well just get started now, because this is close to 800 pages of sad, so I might as well just get right into it. And I'm just gonna take you guys with. We're gonna see how this goes. The main criticism that I've heard that I feel like I'm going to focus on a lot is just the fact that it's really a lot of build-up just to make you emotional, and there's no actual plot behind it. They just want you to be sad, which can get kind of frustrating because it's kind of just like exploiting a character's trauma just to make the reader feel an emotion instead of actually having a good plot that makes you feel attached to the characters. But, you know, we'll just keep that in mind. We'll just go off of the idea that the author did want it to make it maybe a little bit emotionally tolling at the expense of like the actual plot or something like that. Okay, let's do this. So it's now 2 p.m. so it's been 12-ish hours since I started. I read for maybe an hour last night and then I fell asleep, and when I woke up I just kind of finished the first little section, so we are that far into the book. And there's 7 total sections of the book, so like my plan originally was to maybe do a section a day, but that seems very ambitious, so we'll see how far we can get every time. I'm gonna keep this video as spoiler-free as possible, but just a brief overview of the book so far. It follows these 4 main characters, Jude, Willem, Malcolm, and JB. And the thing is, I am really bad at following books that have like a lot of main characters. Like when I read The Mysterious Island, I took like 7 months to read it, which is the longest I've ever taken on a book. And I mean, I also wasn't reading consistently, so there's like long periods where I just wasn't reading at all, and then I would try to get back into the story and I kind of forgot who everybody was. But I just had a really hard time getting invested in books that have like more than 1 or 2 main characters that you focus on, because I suck at names and I don't picture the characters when I'm reading about them, so it's hard for me to like distinguish which storyline goes to which character. But honestly, I think I'm doing okay so far. Jude and Willem are like the 2 close friends, and it's gone into the other backstories, but it hasn't gone into Jude's backstory yet. He's kind of like just sad and everything kind of sucks for him, but it doesn't really say why yet. I have heard from other people's videos that he's kind of like the focus of the book, and you kind of go more in depth with his story later, and like he's the person that people are most attached to. Honestly, I'm kind of interested in all of the characters just because it's like you know, it's just 4 guys, and you want good for them because they all kind of have had interesting lives so far, like from what you know of them. They're just dudes hanging out. Anyways, Kalen just got here, so we're gonna spend some time hanging out, and then maybe after he leaves, I'll get back into the book a little bit. Alright, it's 6:30-ish right now, and Kalen just went home, which means we're back to reading time. And the thing is, I've set aside all of my life priorities right now to read this book. I had 3 days off from work, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna take these 3 days, I'm gonna completely just forget everything else that I have to do, and I'm just gonna read this book and just like immerse myself in it as much as possible. And like I said, I finished that first part. There's 7 parts, so I think I'm gonna try my best to read at least 100 more pages, which will bring me roughly to page 200. That's the goal for tonight, at least 100 more pages. On page 200, it's been about an hour because I tend to read 100 pages every hour, which doesn't really mean anything because my goal isn't to like speed through this book. I'm not trying to get through it in as little time as possible. And I will say so far, there's nothing that's like unusually upsetting. When people talk about this book, they talk about throwing in like every trauma possible, you know? I'm kind of just waiting for them to like expand on that and then be like, hey, here's this super unrealistic, like every single bad thing that could happen is happening to this person, because right now it's just kind of like surface level. Although I will say the fact that they started off and this surface level is already that depressing and impactful on his life, it's not looking too good. I don't know if it's just me being like overly aware of it or if it's like an actual thing in the book, but like it feels like when they're talking about Jude, because this whole second section is really just focused on Jude the entire time. Like the first section was very much focused on the 3 guys, and then this one is focused like entirely on Jude. I don't see his name anywhere near as much as the other ones, and I don't know if that's like an intentional thing or if they just happen to not use his name as much. And the only reason I noticed that is because it's very hard for me to follow this many characters, so I'm constantly like checking on the names to remember who I'm actually reading about. And like for everybody else, like I'm looking through the earlier parts of the book and there's names everywhere because they're all talking about each other and they're all talking about themselves. And the book is in 3rd person, it's not like 1st person ever, but it uses everybody's names. It uses the person's name that is narrating that part of the story. But like I've been reading about Jude for a very, very long time now, for over 100 pages, and I've only seen his name a handful of times. Like it's only when somebody is like saying his name out loud, but like the book doesn't, I don't know if that's intentional or if that's just like me focusing too much on it, but I don't know, it's interesting. I do understand what people say when they say take the trigger warning seriously, because it does kind of just like go straight into very graphic detail about things that like, you know, most people don't really want to read about. And it's stuff like that where it's just like uncomfortable to read and like it doesn't really add anything, it's just uncomfortable. I think that's the type of thing that people have an issue with, just like being uncomfortable for the sake of making somebody uncomfortable. For reference, I'm on page 223-ish right now. I'm definitely stalling because I feel connected to Jude and I don't want anything to happen to him, and I feel like something's gonna happen soon because there's a good thing and I know that, like, you know, that probably isn't gonna last. I'm trying to like stall right now because I'm nervous for where this is gonna go. Alright, it's 10 p.m. I just finished The Postman, which is part 2 out of 7. So we're officially this far in the book, which, to be honest, is great progress for one day considering I have barely read in the past, like, year, but I'm invested. Didn't want to say it, didn't want to be, like, attached to these characters because of how upset everybody gets about them, but realistically, I mean, that's the whole point of this book, right? Like, it builds it up so that you're invested in these characters, and then it just absolutely destroys you at the end. I'm very afraid to be attached to these characters because that one ended on, like, not a terrible note. And from everything that I've seen, if you ever feel happy for the characters, don't keep your hopes up. I don't know. I'm very stressed. I'm genuinely very stressed for these characters. I want everything to work out for them. The thing is, I don't work the next 2 days. I don't really have school because I'm on spring break right now, so I am fully devoted to this book, and I should probably go to sleep, but also I kind of slept in today because I was reading so late last night. I'm very invested, and I probably shouldn't, but I'm probably gonna keep reading into this 3rd section tonight. If I do, I think I'm just not gonna do any more time lapses for right now. I'm just gonna like get invested in it, read as much as I can, and then if anything emotionally damaging happens, or if I just like get tired and go to bed, I'll update you guys on like where I'm leaving off. But so far, not too bad. There were some things, like 2 sections that were a little bit graphic and a little bit uncomfortable to read, but other than that, things are going good. Things are going okay. I did almost cry like happy tears for the character at one point. My 2 main emotions are just discomfort and like happiness for this character right now, so I don't think it's gonna last. Alright, we finished part 3. It's 320 pages, which looks like that. It is currently 1:20 a.m. No emotions coming out of me for this 3rd part. It was just more backstory and more just like character development. There wasn't really anything. There was no point where I really felt like any emotion towards what was being said in this section. I am very excited to find out more of Jude's backstory, but I think this is where I'm gonna end today. Just because yesterday when I started reading, I was really forcing myself to read the pages, and if you can see in the time lapse, I was like barely reading the pages. I just could not focus at all, and I really don't want to get to that point right now because now I'm actually invested in the story, so I don't want to just like skim over it when I actually need to know what's happening. So I'm gonna leave this here for tonight, and we will pick it back up tomorrow. Hey guys, guess what time it is? It's currently 4:30 a.m. It's currently 4:30 in the morning. You remember that last clip where I said, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to bed because I'm gonna get tired and I don't wanna, you know. This book has taken over the past 24 hours of my life. I want nothing more than to just hear this story. But I'm currently on page 384, so we've made some more progress. I guess really it's like morbid curiosity because like, it's not the type of book that you want to read, you know? It's not the type of thing where you're like, oh, I want this character to, you know, share their backstory and share their experiences, because you know that it's not pleasant and you don't really want to hear it, but at the same time, like, you know, what happened, you know? I want to know as much as the other characters do. Hello, welcome to day 2 of reading this book. We've just passed the 36-hour mark. I didn't have a time limit for this. I just wanted to get through it whenever I got through it, but I can't seem to put it down. I've read 400 pages in the past day, but the problem with that is I stayed up until 5 a.m. and then slept until 1 p.m., so my day is kind of just getting started. And Kalen doesn't come back until like 10 p.m. tonight because he was staying at his family's house, and then he's working closed, so he's not gonna come back until like 10:30-ish, which means I have 8 hours fully to myself in which I can just do this. And it's probably not good to spend that entire time on this book, but I'm not sure I'll be able to put it down once I start. That's my little recap right now. I'm on page 413. Oh, a bee. Hey, guy. I'm on page 413, which is section 4 out of 7, and this one ends in about 70 pages? I at least want to get that far, but considering how this is going, it's gonna be more than that. I'm too invested in this. It's 4:15, I'm on page 480, which means we've officially made it to the happy years. Part 5 out of 7, which, as everybody says, the happy years are probably not that happy, because there is still so much of Jude's past to talk about, I think. It's a really weird book, though, because, like, it starts off talking about how they were friends in college, so you think it's gonna be a story about a bunch of, like, 20-year-olds in college being friends and, like, stuff is happening then. So it's really weird because it explores, like, the entirety of their lives. Definitely not what I expected, because when I first heard that it was about 4 friends in college, I thought that's what it was going to be about. It's very much focused on the lives, like the individual lives, instead of the lives as a group. And part of why this is so shocking is because when you hear about people talking about this book, they just say, oh, so many traumas, you know, this is such a sad book because of everything that happens. But so far, the stuff that I've been more upset about has been, like, the characters getting older and realizing that they're getting older. Like, obviously, the big, like, traumatic stuff that they talk about is not pleasant to read, but it's the stuff that's like, oh, yeah, I'm, like, you know, I'm in my 20s, I'm in my 30s, I'm in my 40s, and I still don't have a relationship, and I have the same friends, and, like, my life isn't where I thought it would be. So for me, those have been the more emotional moments, just, like, them realizing that they're not living the lives that they thought they would. Currently, this far along, we just have this little bit left, which, honestly, I could finish today if I really wanted to. I don't think I should. Mentally, I don't think I will be well if I go through this whole journey in 2 days, but I think that's how it's gonna play out. 9:30 p.m. right now, and I just hit page 600, which means there's roughly 200 pages left, and I haven't felt emotional since the first like 200 pages when the good thing happened. It was a happy tear that happened because it was a good thing that happened to this character, but I haven't felt sad yet, which I feel like is something that everybody says they get this far and they're like, oh, I thought I'd be more sad than this. I thought I'd be crying over it, but I'm just reading it and it's not that bad. But like genuinely, I don't know if I'm gonna cry over this. I mean, I'm assuming somebody dies. Like that seems like the obvious way that this is gonna go, just because like that's a sad thing that happens. But as of right now, I don't know that I will cry because of this book. But I could also just be saying that because that's what everybody says, and then you get to the end of the book, so we'll see. Hello, here's my floor update. Currently in the last 100 pages, which based on what I've seen from other people, something happens here, and I have yet to properly cry for this book, so we're gonna see if this does it for me. Final stretch, I guess. Me. Just got to do Comrade, for anybody wondering. It is section 6 out of 7. We have left the happy years. So I just finished this book. It's very late and I'm very tired. So I will come back to you guys in the morning with my final thoughts on it. All right, it's the next day now. I'm a little bit more awake and let's talk about this book. Honestly, didn't cry. There was a couple times where I like had tears in my eyes and like one fell or something, but one was a happy time and one was like kind of a sad time. Does that say more about the book or me? I'm not sure. I think partly because of how much it's been hyped up as being this sad book, I thought something like really, really sad and surprising would happen at the very end, and I kind of like had it in my head built up, so then when it was kind of predictable, I hope nobody gets mad at me for saying that, because I'm not necessarily saying it was a bad book, I'm just saying I expected more because of how much people reacted. It seemed like everything that happened, like, yes, obviously they talk about a lot of trauma and it's very serious and like, it's a serious book and it can be hard for people to read, but for me personally, it just seems like, yeah, that's the way that this is gonna go. Like, even without all the internet hype, you look at this cover, right? Or you look at the back, you look at any of it, and you're like, yeah, this is going to be a sad book. So when you're reading about this stuff and you're like going through all of these stories, everything that happens seems like something that would happen. I felt very immersed in it the entire time, which is why I couldn't put it down. You saw, like, it took 2 days and I went through all of this and I could not set it down. I do feel very attached to the characters. Like, I'll be sitting there, I'll be having a conversation with Kaylin, and in my head, I'm still thinking about these characters and how they would have that interaction, and it just, like, it very much feels like they're part of your life, or you're part of theirs, or, you know, it feels like you're connected to these characters, which I guess is why people get so emotional, is because it feels like you truly know this person and you know this friend group, so then when something bad happens to them, you feel bad for it. Okay, for this last little bit of the video, I am going to talk spoilers, like major end of book spoilers. So if you haven't read this book, or if you just don't want to know how it ends, just leave. This is your time to leave the video now, because I'm going to be talking about the actual contents within this book and the actual storyline, and I know most people don't talk about that in their videos, but I would just like to briefly address it because I want to talk about it. Final warning. Get off the video. Talking about book, talking about contents of the book. We are now all people who have either read the book or people who are just very curious and don't want to put themselves through 800 pages of sad. And I know YouTube can sometimes get a little bit upset about certain not great words, so I'm gonna try my best to just like go around them. The reason that none of it was so surprising to me is because it all just seemed predictable. It all seemed like what is going to happen. I said it earlier in this video, I said realistically, somebody's gonna die. That's what would make it so sad, because this whole time you're building up this friendship and these four people that are so close together, and then they kind of float apart and all this stuff, but they still are friends at the end of the day. What can make the main character's life suck more than everything he's already gone through is if he loses the people that he actually has, that he cares about. So I kind of figured somebody is going to die, at least one person. It also is no surprise that Jude, the main character, dies, just because look at everything he's been through. He has nothing left. Like, there is nothing really surprising about the fact that he died, because that's kind of what the whole book is leading up to. I don't know, like there was no point where I was like, yeah, maybe he'll actually survive this one, because obviously, you know, he had some times where stuff got better, but at the end of the day, everything that he's gone through, when he loses everything that he has, like, and the fact that it's Willem who dies, that obviously is, you know, that's devastating, because that's his one close person that he has in his life, but at the same time, that's exactly why he would be the character to die, right? Like, that seems like the obvious choice, because that's the person that Jude is closest to, and if your goal is to make Jude as sad as possible, take the one person that he truly like cares about and has love for. And of course it's going to happen right after the happy years, which surprisingly we're actually happy. It's all this stuff that's happening to him, and he's finally experiencing a life that is somewhat good, as good as it can be after all of this terrible stuff that's happened to him. So it only makes sense that right at the end of the happy years, something bad is gonna happen that's gonna completely destroy any progress that was made during those years. Or like even from the beginning, like he starts off in a church, and I hate to say it, but when you're thinking about like bad things that happen when you're within a church community, I don't mean anything against people who like have any religion. This isn't necessarily a religion thing, it's just when you think about like, I don't remember the word, but when you're thinking about like church groups and you're thinking about the bad things specifically that happen within those groups, you're gonna think about, you know, the person in charge, the person that maybe you go to confess, taking advantage of the children that come to him and trust him. And obviously that's not a great thing, but it's something that is fairly common. It's something that like if somebody told me something bad happened within a church, like that's what my brain would immediately go to. And I don't know if that's the same for everybody else, but I feel like that's kind of like what's promoted as just the bad thing that happens in church. So I just feel like everything that happened to him was very much predictable. And yes, it was sad to read about, but it's all just stuff that happens, and it sucks that it all happened to one person, but it's just kind of, I don't know. I feel like there's no way for me to say that without sounding really messed up. Final thoughts. I was attached to the characters. I was happy when they were happy, and it was sad when they were sad, but not to the point where I was crying, because it all just seemed like where the story was going. There was no point where it was like, you know, out of nowhere. And I think that's the type of thing that makes me cry, is when you're so attached to these characters and everything is good, and there's also some bad thrown in, but then something happens that there's no way you could have thought of. For example, and I hate to say it, but Jude was having like thoughts of what if his dad is going to do the same thing that all these other adult men in his life have done. I think if the book had just completely, if they wanted to turn it into like this devastating story that's like really traumatic, they could have had the dad actually do stuff. I hate to say it, I know that's like really dark, but I think that would have really made me emotional to see that like he has this close connection with an adult man for the first time in his life ever, and then he ends up doing the same thing and he realizes he can't trust anybody ever. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I just have a really, really dark mind, and like, you know, I think that would be probably too much for a lot of people to read. I feel like that's what would have made me cry. So yes, I was attached to the characters. Yes, it was a sad book. No, I didn't cry, but I do still think it was a really good story, and like, I don't know, if it makes other people cry, then I think maybe my brain is just not. Hello, so since I recorded that initial thing, because I didn't really want to look into the book, I just kind of wanted to read it and like give my honest opinion, just like knowing as little as possible. Because obviously I've seen some people record like their reactions to reading it, but they never talked about like the the thought process that went into making the book or like anything like that. And after watching some things, I've learned a couple things about the thought process that went into this book. For one thing, just the fact that like the author wanted there to be a bunch of really great moments and a bunch of really terrible moments, and like that contrast, and you know, it was supposed to be exaggerated. The other thing is that the author, which I kind of heard from some people talking about, but I'm pretty sure the author wanted it to be sad. And that's the reason that some people argue that maybe it's kind of just going a little bit too far with trying to make the reader sad. Like, I wanted to feel sad for it, but because so many things were happening and it was all like very extreme, there was no point where I was really surprised by anything because it was extreme the entire time. Like the whole time you're expecting all of these terrible things to happen, so when they do, you're just like, yeah, well, that's just how it goes for this person. Like, it didn't feel sad to me because it was just another thing in this lineup of traumas. It didn't really feel like an actual sad thing that happened because it's just like, yeah, his life sucks, get used to it. I do think that people who have experienced the more like in-depth trauma that's discussed in the book, I don't think they should read it. I don't think it would be very nice to go through again, even if it is through a character. That being said, some of the things that the main character does is also things that I have done. Not anytime recently, but enough to where I can still relate to the feelings that are being written, and that is the one thing I will say like affected me deeply, because like I could see myself going back to the mindsets that are written about. Right now, I don't feel the need to do anything bad to myself in that way to read about it and to go into that mindset again. Like, I think that is something that's going to stick with me for a little bit, just like reading about that mindset and getting back into it and being like, well, like just relating to the character, I guess, and relating to the experience that he has. So I think if you haven't gone through any of the struggles that he's gone through, it's a very different reading experience from if you can relate in any way to the stuff that is being talked about. And the other thing I've seen is just people talking about how it's a good book for representation for gay people, which I completely do not think that this should be like something that people go to when they want representation. When you want representation, you don't want extremes. You want representation the same way that you would talk about any other normal thing that's happening. Like, it is just like a casual thing that's mentioned throughout the book, but it's the fact that the book is filled with so much terrible things that happen that, like, I don't know, if you want representation, you want it to be a normal relationship. You don't want the author to like play into that to make it even more sad because like you're rooting for these gay characters. I hope people don't reference this book as being good representation, because I don't want people going to this book and looking for a place of comfort or something that they can relate to, because So I think my final thoughts are just that I cannot sum up how I feel about this book. There's a lot of conflicting emotions, and like there is a lot of trauma within the book, but it didn't personally make me cry just because there was so much of it. And in my head, it was going to be a lot more gruesome, a lot more in detail, but that really would add absolutely nothing to the story. Like, that would purely be to make the reader uncomfortable. So it makes sense that that's not in the book, but like that's kind of what I thought it was going to be, so it didn't make me cry, but I do understand why people are so affected, because it's definitely some dark topics that you should not go into if you are not prepared for that. I still don't think you should read this book if you don't think you can handle it, or if you need to like stop at any point throughout the book, then I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because it really is a lot to go through. And the one last thing I will say is, because I read it in 48 hours, there's a chance that I was just too tired to like fully process the story, or also that I went through their whole lives, because the book goes through their whole lives. It's possible that I went through their entire lives so fast that like it wasn't upsetting to me that these bad things are happening, because I just like sped through it and I didn't get attached to the actual lives of these characters. I don't know. I think if I were to reread it, I would probably be more emotional, just because at that point I know what happens to them, but I also get to see the little details of their regular lives, like them just like having jobs that they like, or getting an apartment for the first time, you know? Just the little life details I feel like are a lot more impactful than the actual traumas that are described, because that's what you expect from this book. Also, cover art, I'm not gonna say anything, but I did not know that that's what it was. If any of you have read the book and have thoughts about it, then share, and please don't judge me for maybe thinking things a little bit too dark. I don't know. I feel like that's definitely gonna offend some people who think that this book is the worst thing that they've ever read, but I don't know how to end this video. I really feel like people are gonna get upset, so I'm just gonna leave it there. Okay. That's my thoughts and opinions about this book. Good book, didn't make me cry. I will see you next time.